Discoveries made in basic scientific research often have important economic consequences, and countries with strong scientific research establishments often also develop strong economies as well. That's why actions taken recently by the Trump administration to reduce the effectiveness of the scientific research capabilities of the United States are so concerning. Scientific research has been a pursuit carried out in essentially all developed countries, and to some extent in developing countries. Prior to World War II, the United States had a respectable but hardly dominant scientific research establishment. In those days, most basic scientific research in the United States was carried out in a relatively small number of prestigious universities and technical institutes, mostly located on the east and west coasts. Before World War II, there was almost no U.S. government funding for basic scientific research. A small number of federally operated research facilities did exist, but these were mission-oriented applied research operations, while basic research was done primarily in university settings. Funding for this basic scientific research came mostly from private foundations, from a few businesses that were interested in research projects related to company operations, and to a lesser extent from university endowments. To see where the U.S. stood in basic research in this era, consider the number of Nobel Prizes won by American scientists compared to those from other countries. Prior to World War II, Americans garnered slightly less than 16% of the Nobel Prizes awarded in physics and less than 13% in physiology and medicine. A far larger percentage of Nobel Prizes during the pre-World War II era went to European scientists. Major changes in the scientific enterprise in the United States took place during World War II. The rise of the Nazi regime during the late 1930s drove many European scientists to migrate to the United States, where many obtained research positions in academia. At the time, there was strong public sentiment against the United States entering the conflicts in Europe and Asia, but President Roosevelt recognized the need for the U.S. military to be prepared for war in Europe and Asia. As early as 1939, Roosevelt had been alerted to the possibility that the Germans might be working to develop a nuclear weapon, and he authorized the creation of the Advisory Committee on Uranium. At the first meeting of this committee, $6,000 was budgeted for neutron experiments. By mid-1940, Roosevelt authorized the establishment of the National Defense Research Committee, and by 1941, the Manhattan Project was in operation. This led to the establishment of the laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico, as well as several other facilities needed to produce the enriched uranium for use in an atomic bomb. With the entry of the United States into World War II in 1941, numerous additional defense-related research projects were funded by the federal government at universities across the country where there was the scientific talent needed to meet the wartime challenges. Examples included Caltech's Kellogg Radiation Laboratory work to develop solid fuel rockets and to remedy problems with torpedo guidance systems. Similarly, at MIT, important work on improving radar and sonar systems was undertaken. The success of the World War II Manhattan Project marked a turning point. Federal research and development support was consolidated in the immediate post-war period. In a 1945 report entitled Science, the Endless Frontier, Vannevar Bush, who headed the U.S. wartime research and development effort, provided the intellectual rationale for federal support of both basic research and research related to national security, industry, and human health and welfare. He called for a national research foundation funded by the federal government and led by scientists from the private sector to support basic scientific research and education in health and medicine, the natural sciences, and new weapons. Legislation was adopted in 1950 that established the National Science Foundation, NSF, to support research in the basic sciences. The role of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, expanded to cover most health-related research, including university-based biomedical research and training. The Office of Naval Research took on a major role in supporting academic research in the physical sciences, and the new Atomic Energy Commission had been assigned control of research and development on nuclear weapons and nuclear power. NSF's mission focused on supporting fundamental research and related educational activities with an annual budget that was less than $10 million until the late 1950s. In contrast, the NIH's annual budget, which had been less than $3 million at the end of the war, grew to more than $50 million by 1950. Another outgrowth of the Manhattan Project following World War II was the development of a system of 17 federally funded national laboratories with major capabilities in basic and applied research not found elsewhere, along with some mission-specific facilities such as Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The era of big science in the United States was in full swing by 1950. In addition, the center of gravity of basic science had shifted from Europe to the United States. Europe had been devastated by World War II, and recovery initially was quite slow. The Marshall Plan, enacted in 1948, helped 16 European countries and West Germany to recover economically and socially from the effects of the war. Some Marshall Plan money was allocated to rebuilding science in these countries, but in this process, there was less influence on basic science and more on applied science and technology. The result of this shift in emphasis was dramatic. The percentage of Americans winning Nobel Prizes in physiology and medicine rose from 13% before the war to 52% after the war, and the percentage of Americans winning Nobel Prizes in physics rose from 16% before the war to 48% after the war. After World War II, federal funding for both basic and applied research rose steadily for 80 years, and the U.S. economy benefited from the innovations that followed from some of that research. The outlook for federal research funding changed dramatically when Trump was elected president for a second time. Trump's proposed budget for fiscal year 2026 includes major cuts to both basic and applied research, either done by or supported by federal agencies. Basic research is hit particularly hard in the proposed budget. NIH, which funds much of the medical research in the country, is scheduled to have its budget reduced by 37%. The National Science Foundation, NSF, which funds much of the basic research in American universities, would see its budget cut by more than 50%. NSF funding for research on climate and clean energy along with social, behavioral, and economic science research, would be essentially eliminated. NASA's science budget would be cut by 53%. NASA's climate monitoring satellite programs would be eliminated. Funding for the space station would be significantly reduced, and NASA's educational programs would be eliminated. NASA also would be required to contract out several activities to private vendors, such as Elon Musk's SpaceX company. The cut of 24% to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration would eliminate essentially all its research related to climate change. The 33% cut to the U.S. Geological Survey's budget would eliminate all its biological and ecological research relevant to efforts such as monitoring water quality, protecting endangered species, and predicting landscape impacts from climate change. The cuts to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's budget would eliminate the department's programs related to climate change and renewable energy. The 46% cut to the Environmental Protection Agency would eliminate several of its air and water quality programs. The 62% cut to the U.S. Forest Service would drastically reduce its rangeland and forest research programs. The 39% cut to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention budget would eliminate several of its non-infectious disease research programs. That includes some things like cancer. In addition to calling for cuts in climate research, the proposed fiscal year 26 budget curtails spending on projects aimed at adapting to climate change or reducing planet warming emissions. At the Department of Energy, for example, the proposed budget calls for slashing $15.2 billion that was provided under the bipartisan infrastructure law passed in the previous administration to support the production of electric vehicles and batteries and remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Even though the 2026 fiscal year federal budget has yet to be approved, the Trump administration already has had a severe negative effect on American science. Thousands of scientists and engineers who were working for the federal government have been fired, and thousands of federal research grants already have been canceled. The journal Nature recently surveyed scientists to determine the impact of Trump's science policies. The results are shown in this chart. Clearly, they don't portend well for the future of American science. Some in Trump's administration have claimed that much of the research that's being canceled by his administration will be taken up by private industry. But that's a specious argument when it comes to basic research. Industry likely will provide some support for applied research projects that align with their immediate business objectives. But industry is unlikely to fund much basic research in areas that don't provide that immediate support. In addition, most major companies operate internationally, and much of any new research they undertake would be done outside the United States. The reductions in federal research spending proposed in Trump's fiscal year 26 budget would have several devastating long-term effects. First, the U.S. will lose an entire generation of new scientists who currently are being trained in graduate programs at universities across the country. Second, essentially all research in climate science here in the United States will stop. Additionally, a large chunk of basic research in the physical and biological research areas will stop. Many bright young people interested in becoming scientists will choose to study at universities outside the United States. Many of the scientists here in the United States who have been fired or whose research programs have been canceled will move to other countries where their talents are appreciated. President Macron of France already has announced a Choose Europe for Science program that will draw some of the best and brightest scientists away from the United States. Finally, even if a subsequent administration here in the United States decides to fund research at a more rational level, it likely will take decades to reverse the damage being done by the current administration. My career in science and education here in the United States has lasted for a full 40 years. I have never previously been as concerned about the state of science here in the United States as I am now. If you agree with my concerns, please share them with family and friends and with your representatives in Congress. Thanks for watching.